Hello everyone. Today's topic of discussion is migrating web apps to Azure App Services. And once again, welcome all of you. Before we get started on the topic for the day, if you have a question, please use the Q&A window to ask your questions. And the recording of the presentation will be made available to you in due course of time once you have registered. A quick round of introduction for the speakers today. So we have Christina Havdin. She's a senior engineering manager. I'm joined by Rahul Gupta today. He's a senior program manager. And myself, Gaurav Seth. I'm a senior program manager as well on Azure App Services team. So before we get into the Azure migration tooling, a quick note on why it is super important for you to migrate your web apps to Azure. So it all starts with the peerless innovation, where we as Microsoft have 25 plus years of experience of SQL innovation. We are the only public cloud provider to have a managed app hosting platform for .NET web apps. In terms of the unmatched experiences that we provide for our developers, we have a shared code base which ensures full parity with SQL Server. We have industry-leading performance and security for SQL queries. And again, we have experience hosting millions of apps with billions of daily requests. We provide you multiple different migration tools which give you a seamless experience to migrate your web apps to Azure App Services. And in terms of the offers that we have around the migration programs, again, as per a report that we did with one of our partners some time back, GigaOM, basically what we figured out was that it saves up to 54% versus hosting your web applications on premise. And if you compare to AWS, the saving for your ASP.NET web apps is around 30%. And again, if you are a Visual Studio subscriber, you can save on pay-as-you-go rates with enterprise dev test offers. So let's start by talking about the whole Azure Migrate integrated experience for at-scale discovery and assessment of web apps. As you're all aware that Azure Migrate is the centerpiece of migration tooling on Azure, and Azure Migrate already provides the options for assessment and migration of Azure VMware solutions, at-scale discovery and assessment of SQL instances and databases, virtual machines, and the newest addition to the family is at-scale discovery and assessment of ASP.NET web applications. Now here is a quick note on supported versions and prerequisites. So in terms of VMware, what we require is hosts which are 5.5 or later. In terms of vCenter requirements, we basically support vCenter 5.5, 6.5 and above. In terms of the server requirements, Windows Server 2008 or 2 and above. In terms of the requirement for your ASP.NET web applications, we support currently only Windows Server operating systems, IS 7.5 and above. Now the whole at-scale discovery process today is currently the experience is again available in public preview, just to point that out. And what we support today is ASP.NET web apps which are hosted on IS web servers deployed to VMware environments. We basically perform bulk discovery of IS web servers using Azure Migrate appliance. And what we do is once we are done with the discovery of IS web servers, we provide you a very rich dashboard which gives you details of the underlying infrastructure for these VMs where the IS web servers were discovered. And for any reason, if the discovery fails, we again have a rich experience to give you descriptive error messages and suggested remediation steps, which again go a long way in helping you with troubleshooting. Once you have discovered the IS web servers, that's where you go ahead and kickstart the process of at-scale assessment. Now we again allow you bulk assessment based on properties that you define, and these properties could be the region that you require, do you require isolation, what's the kind of offer, to name a few. Now we again go ahead and assess every individual web application against a set of readiness checks, and we come back and report what applications are ready to migrate as is, what number of applications are ready with conditions, and which applications cannot be migrated to Azure App Services in its current form. And again, a quick note on the kind of readiness checks that we perform. We basically look at number of checks. Example being, what's the kind of port that you are hosting on premises, what's the kind of authentication used, what's your app pool configuration looks like, to name a few. Now once we have done with the assessment, again we provide you a very rich dashboard for the detailed view of assessment even at individual web app level, and we go ahead and even provide you a monthly cost estimate based on the suggested SKU for migration to Azure App Services. And again, you also have the ability to go ahead and review individual web app result. Now this is all about at scale discovery and assessment of your web applications. Just a quick note that in terms of the whole bulk migration experience out of Azure Migrate, that's something that is still in works and should be available for you in preview again in time to come. Now the other option for having your ASP.NET web applications migrated to Azure App Services. So the previous experience on Azure Migrate was all about bulk discovery and assessment, which was targeting your entire data center. But what if your migration target is a single IaaS web server? That is where PowerShell script-based migration comes into picture. Now again, on the PowerShell side of the things, we support ASP.NET web apps hosted on IS 7.5 and above. It's very simple. It's just the scripts that you need to copy and execute, no installation required. And what we do is, again, in terms of the readiness checks, is the same readiness checks that we would execute on Azure Migrate. And we again perform a bulk assessment for all the web applications which are hosted on the source IS web server. And a quick note here is we also provide you an option with PowerShell scripts where if you are in more like a offline online scenario, you could do the assessment offline and then package all the content and config for the web applications and move to a different virtual machine which has internet connectivity and perform the migration straight out of that virtual machine. Moving on, if you now have the requirement to basically go ahead and migrate a single site, we provide you app migration assistant tools. Now this is perhaps the simplest experience for you to go ahead and kickstart your migration. And the way it starts we have an online experience. You go ahead and provide a publicly accessible URL for your web app if that's available, and we quickly come back and give you a report of what are the terms of technologies and frameworks being used and what does the support for those look like on Azure App Services. Once you have this supportability, suitability report in your hand, you go ahead and download the tool, and we again provide you a step-by-step experience in terms of discovery, assessment, and migration of that single site. Now currently the tool is already generally available for ASP.NET migration. We also have the tool available for migrating your Java Tomcat web app hosted on a Windows server on premises. Just a quick note, this tool is currently available in public preview. Moving on, there will always be cases where probably some of these tools may come back and report that your web application may not be ready for migration, and it could all be due to requirements where your application depends on custom assemblies or has some custom OS requirements. In such a scenario, you'll be best served to basically take your ASP.NET web application and containerize it and move it and deploy it to Windows container on Azure App Services. And the good news is we again provide you a tool to provide you step-by-step guidance. So the containerization tool for your ASP.NET Web application simply is an experience of pointing at your ASP.NET Web applications on IIS Web Server and containerizing this web application. We also provide you the experience to parameterize the configurations for your web application. And remember, the artifacts like the Docker files that are created are downloadable and reusable. And the best part, we provide you customization again, pretty much at every step, right from containerizing your ASP.NET Web App to creating the artifacts to even uploading it to an Azure container registry and eventually deploying it onto Windows container on Azure App Services. Again, a quick note in terms of app containerization supported versions and prerequisites. So on the ASP.NET side of the house, the requirement is that we support Microsoft.NET Framework 3.5 and above. For iOS, again, it's iOS version 7.5 and later. In terms of the requirements for the app server, so you need to have the Microsoft Web Deploy tool installed and Powershell remoting enabled. Another quick note, the same app containerization tool also provides you an experience to go ahead and containerize a Java Tomcat web application and deploy it as a container on Azure App Services for Linux. And the quick note on requirements, we today support Apache Tomcat version 8.0 or later. And in terms of JDK, we support version 7.5 or later. And again, on the app server requirement side of the house, what you require is SSH remoting enabled, and you need to have a root account. So now it's time to go ahead and watch some demos around the tooling that I just spoke about. Over to you, Christina, for a quick round of demos.
Thanks, Gaurav. I'm going to start by showing that experience that Gaurav outlined for the Azure Migrate bulk discovery and assessment of IIS.NET applications in a VMware vCenter. So I've started here on the portal.azure.com, and I've gone to Azure Migrate, which if you just type Azure Migrate here in the search bar, it'll come right up. Now the new thing here is here on servers, databases, and web apps. This will let you look at a whole data center at once, not just for web apps, but also things like SQL databases, as was mentioned. If it's your first time setting this up, you'll click Discover here, and this will walk you through the experience of setting up that appliance, which is basically a VM that you can download and set up within your network. The VM model is kind of nice for a couple of reasons. One of them is, first of all, that sensitive things stay within your network. When you set up the appliance, you specify the passwords for connecting to your various VMs. Those all stay local to the appliance. They never leave your network. They never leave the appliance. They don't go to Azure. Also, the appliance has all of the information, all the logic needed to do all the discovery in an agentless way. So you don't have to install all sorts of stuff. You don't have to install anything on all those different VMs, and also the appliance isn't going to install anything on those VMs either in order to do that discovery. It's done in an agentless way, and the summary information is sent back to Azure, so you can look at it all in one place afterwards. Now, I'm not going to do this appliance setup right now, but I am going to go to a project that already has that discovery done for web apps. You can see in this project there are 29 servers that were found that were running IIS. And if I click on that, I can see a little bit more information. For example, I can see how many web apps were found on that server. And if I look more closely, I can see what were those sites that were found and some summary information about them, like what binding ports they were using or the application pool names. If I want to take this to the next level, I can do an assessment. For web apps, I could click Assess and select Azure App Service. At this point, I can pick some different settings. I can choose whether or not I need to have isolation or if I want to use reserved instances, and select any subset of the machines that have IIS for including in that particular assessment. Over here are the assessments that I've already done for Azure App Service, so I'm going to open one of those up. And what this will do is it will look at all of those applications, all of those sites that existed on the servers that I included, in this case, 27 web servers and 543 applications. It will determine whether they are ready for migration to App Service, if they're ready with conditions, or if they might not be ready. In this case, most of the applications are ready. So one of the things the assessment does here is it's making an estimate of kind of what that presence on App Service might look like. We do kind of some best practice allotment of apps to App Service plans and tell you how many App Service plans you might want for that number of sites at the SKU that we selected based on the options you picked during assessment, like if you want it isolated or not. In addition, you can look here under readiness and see why we might have determined that a site was ready with conditions or not ready. For example, here's a site that was ready with conditions. That means it's okay to migrate, but there might be things that you wanted to be aware of. Like if you were using certificates, you might need to upload those certificates or repoint A records after the migration. This site, for example, is using a binding on port 97. App Service only supports bindings on 80 and 443 for incoming traffic, so this is something that requests to the site would need to switch the port in their requests. As an example, we can also look at a site that is not ready. And you can see in this case, there aren't just warnings, there are also some issues. These are things that we would consider basically blocking or that would not be compatible with App Service without having adjustment first. So for example, the application pool identity might be a particular type that's not going to translate onto App Service. Now that was pretty simple for me to look at the whole data center. In the future, there will also be an option to do a migrate kind of within this same experience with Azure Migrate and in bulk from the vCenter. But in the meantime, or if you're doing kind of the one server at a time scenario, you could also use the PowerShell migration scripts. Now this is where you would get them. This you can access using the link aka.ms/appmigrate. This has the couple of options that were brought up by Gaurav, including being able to assess a publicly facing URL, as well as the standalone kind of single site at a time tooling. What I'm going to show you is this option, the App Service Migration Assistant for PowerShell, or the PowerShell scripts for migration. So I'm going to jump onto another machine here, one of these web servers. And on this machine, I have this directory of scripts. This is effectively what you get when you download that, click the download button on that PowerShell scripts option. The only thing I've added is this demo script, and I'm going to run it and then show you what's in it. Now, what this demo script is doing is basically calling two of the scripts that are included in the PowerShell scripts package. The first is get site readiness. This is going to look at the local IS server, although I could also point it at another server if I wanted to. It's going to find all of the sites that are on that server and do that kind of Azure Migrate assessment for readiness for each of those sites and save the results in this file location I specified of whether there were any warnings, any errors, and some basic metadata about the sites. Now I'm going to take that output and I'm going to pass it to get site package. This will then package up all of the sites that are specified in that readiness file if they are ready or ready with conditions, basically, if they only have no issues or just warnings. If I wanted to package up everything anyway, even if it had identified errors or issues, then I could pass a flag migrate sites with issues and migrate those sites, or at least package them up for migration anyway. The only exception is if the errors that we identified are ones that would prevent us from doing the packaging and migration, like being unable to access the site content. Now that's already complete. If I look, I now have this directory, and in it, this is the readiness results. So it has an item for each site in this collection. So for example, here's default website. There were no failures or errors or warnings for this site. So it will be packaged when I pass this to the packaging script. I also have a set of another 50 sites. Here's site 1. It didn't have any errors, but it does have this warning. It's the same TCP port check that we saw on the Azure Migrate UI. And that's pretty similar for most of these other sites. So when I passed that to the packaging script, it packaged all of the sites up and created this sort of table of context or index script of all of the packages that are here. Now, you might be on a web server that's locked down, that doesn't have super loose outgoing connections allowed, in which case this is a point that you could actually pause and move these operations to another machine. So rather than continuing the migration here, I'm going to go ahead and copy this packages directory that was made and move to another machine. All right. So as you can see, now I've moved the same folder of packages here. And on this machine, I again have those same scripts with another demo script here. Let me kick that off. And while it's running, I'll show you what it's doing. Now, in this script, I'm not calling get site readiness and get site package because I already did that on the other server. So instead, I'm going to specify some default settings that I want to use. I'm going to specify a region, I'm going to specify my subscription ID and a resource group name. And then I'm going to call generate migration settings. This script is going to generate a default settings file to specify every setting that I need for the migration of these sites for all these packages. Now, this is basically generating a big JSON file of sites separated into app service plan groups. I could create this by hand. I could create this any way I wanted. The generate migration settings is just a quick kind of helper script to generate a nice default option. You can take it from there. So a couple of things that it does. One, it does some basic validation. If I specified a region that was in the wrong format or didn't exist, it would warn me. It would tell me if I didn't have access to my subscription, things like that. It'll also do something similar to the assessment in Azure Migrate, where it will make a best effort to use some best practice and sort your app service plans with a certain kind of safe number of apps in each plan so that they're not overloaded. This block here is just me in the script whittling down to just a few sites, changing a couple settings and saving an updated version of it to use for the migration. So it'll go faster since it'll only be 3 sites. But this line is calling the actual migration using that settings file and telling it where to save my summary information. That summary information is going to include information for each resource that was created on Azure. So it's nice to have as a reference for later. It also outputs that as an object when the script runs, so we'll know the script is complete when it's done because it will try and open up a couple of the links in the browser. Now, it's still going, but I already have this output directory created with the settings, so I can look first at the original settings that were created. And you can see this is grouped by app service plan. So here's the first plan. It has 16 sites in it, it's premium v3. And here's another plan with another 16 and so on for the 4 plans I need to hold all 51 of those sites. Now I could change any of these settings for each of these app service plans independently. I could update the names, I could put them in different subscriptions in different regions. I could change things like the SKU or the number of workers. Scaling up and out is also something that's very easy to do after it's already on app service. The main thing that I would probably need to change about these is the Azure site name. We default it to the local IIS site name, but that might not work on app service because these site names do need to be unique. Site 1 is probably already taken on app service, and also IIS is very forgiving in whatever characters you want to use, but app service has a more limited character set allowed for the app service site names. If I didn't update these when I tried to do the migration, it would immediately validate them and tell me whether or not I can use them or not. So when I updated these settings and picked 3 sites, oh, I think I just saw the, yes. We'll look at the script output in a moment because it just completed. One of the things I did is I made these site names more unique by throwing my resource group name in the front. I'm pretty sure no one had used these names before. And as I said, I changed it to just 3 sites. I updated the tier. Things like that are all possible. Manually, programmatically, you can change the script to whatever you want for these settings. Now the migration completed and saved this results file. So these are some of the things that were created, like this app service plan, and also for each site that was migrated, it includes a reference to what the local site name was, as well as a couple of links so I can refer back later to, for example, where that site is. So it opened this management link. This brings me to the portal for the app service site that was created, or I can go directly to the site browse link and look at what's there. This, for example, being the default IIS site content. So I've showed the experience for the bulk discovery and assessment for Azure Migrate, as well as how to use the PowerShell scripts to do discovery assessment, as well as doing migration for a whole server. With that, I will hand it back.
Thanks, Christina, for walking us through the demo. Now Rahul will demo the app containerization tool. Over to you, Rahul.
In the Explore More section on the Azure Migrate portal, I select the App Containerization Tool, which helps me containerize ASP.NET and Java web applications running on Apache Tomcat. I download the tool, and with the tool running, I select the application type I want to containerize and select a service where I want to run my containerized application. The tool provides a choice between Azure Kubernetes Service and Azure App Service as the container platforms to run your application on. For this demo, I select Azure Kubernetes Service, and then I go through the prerequisites of the tool where it informs me to enable Secure Shell on my application server. I follow that up by signing into my Azure portal by copying the device code that's available here. I paste it, complete my sign-in, and select the Azure tenant and subscription I want to work with. Then to discover my application, I specify a server IP or a fully qualified domain name along with the credentials of the application server. The tool then remotely connects to the application server to discover the application. As you can see, I want to containerize my AirSonic application, so I select it, specify a target container name, and then it gives me an option to parameterize application configurations so that I can make them a deployment time configuration rather than having them hard-coded in my container image. This makes sure that my container image is reusable in the future. Now, the tool also detects application folders that it needs to be containerized, but it also provides an option to externalize other application folders. I specify the application folder and select persistent volumes as my storage option. Now, this option is great to keep the container image lean and for applications that need to run off same shared replica such as stateful applications. Now the next step is to build the container image for my application. I select an Azure Container Registry and get an option to automatically configure monitoring for my application using Azure Application Insights. I select the application for which I want to build the container image and then just click Build. Now once the application container image is built, all that's left to do is to go ahead and deploy the application. For that, I select the AKS cluster I want to deploy my application to. Then I get an option to select the secret store for my application secrets. I have an option to choose Azure Key Vault or use Kubernetes secrets. I select an Azure Key Vault, specify a managed identity, and select the application insights resource I want to use. Now I need to specify an Azure file share that the tool will use during the migration process. I do that and move on to the deployment configuration for the application. Now here, I get the option to customize the prefix string with which all the resources will be deployed, the port, replica sets, and the load balancer for the application. I then specify the configuration for my parameterized database connection string and go ahead and deploy my application. As you can see, the application is deployed and it's accessible on this particular IP address. To make sure everything's running fine, let's just quickly see in kubectl what's happening. And as you can see, there's this external IP and the port on which the application is accessible. The same process is applicable for migrating the applications to Azure App Service. All that's different is that you'll have to specify an app service plan instead of an AKS cluster.
Thanks, Rahul, for the demo. With this, we conclude the demos that showcased all different tools available to discover, assess, and migrate your web apps to Azure App Services. Now, here is the slide with really helpful documents that help you try out some of the tools that we showcased today. With that, thanks for joining us and have a great rest of the event.